Ladies and gentlemen, boils and ghouls, guys and gals, and non binary pals. Welcome to The Gentleman Psychic. I am your host, your MC, your master of ceremonies, your dearest fiend, Richard-Lael Lillard. Richard-Lael is one name, not two. If I were just Richard, I'd be a dick. Anyway, my lovelies, welcome to story time. Welcome to something that is slightly different than we normally do. Ms. Whiskey, I know I'll be so tired all day because I stay up late just to catch the live, but I'm glad I'm here. I am glad you are here, my friend. I am glad you are here too. So I have a lot going on. I know we've got the clock. Oh, we've got the clock going in just a few minutes. Hello, Mary Jane. Hope you're doing well. Um, I don't know if I want to tell you the news now or if I should wait until the end. But I will tell you this. We have voted on, as a public, as a watching group, as a book club, on what book you wanted to read next. And unanimously, almost unanimously rather, the overwhelming majority picked The Devil's Mansion, and that is what we are reading tonight. So it's from 1931. You know, it's not bad for a 90-year-old book. I think I'll fall asleep until the end. Oh, okay, then I will tell you now. So while we're waiting on the clock to strike, so I will go ahead and begin. Life is full of changes, and sometimes one must leap, and I am going to leap. I had other plans that fell through, but I am, as of the early part of next month, I will be moving to New Orleans, and I'm looking forward to it. It's a little bit scary. It's new, but I'm looking forward to it. And I hope that you join me on this journey because I can't do it alone. I hope that you are there to see me off and to enjoy, to sort of spy into my own world. The good thing, by the way, with this is that I will be in a position again to do more of my regular show that I have missed out on for so long. My boys have only made cameos but have not been actually performing, and they have gotten rather tired of that. I don't have anything set up. I don't have anything lined up yet, but I am not worried about that. I know I'll be fine. It's a long journey. It's 1,300 miles, but I drove from Los Angeles to New York. And so now I'm driving from, hello, Kelly. Lovely to see you. I was just making the announcement that I will be moving to New Orleans. So I am looking forward to a new adventure and a new time. My clock did not go off. That is so strange. I don't know why it didn't. Okay, well, I'm sorry we didn't hear the alarm. Oh, maybe. Let me just see something here. Let me just see something. Okay, well, hopefully it'll go off when we have the other one, but that is okay. Anyway, I hope you have picked your poison. Tonight's poison is, of course, arsenic. I had cyanide before, but I have arsenic now because it's what's on the label. And you know you can always believe what you read, right? All right, my lovelies. Ladies and gentlemen, boils and ghouls, I hope you've settled in for something nice and cozy. We are going to read The Devil's Mansion by Rex Jardine, 1931. Chapter 1. A peal of thunder heralded the storm, thunder that echoed and re-echoed in the mountains until it finally died away, grumbling like an angry old man. flash of lightning, and Blair Rodman heard a tree fall somewhere behind him, fall and crash among the trees, tearing their giant limbs until they seemed to scream and moan with pain. The rain, not a soft, gentle mist, but a drenching, driving rain that splashed against his face without warning. The man at the wheel of the big roadster glanced at the night sky, thinking perhaps this was but a shower that would pass quickly. But not a star was visible, and a sickly young moon was scurrying behind a cloud black as bubbling tar. A moment ago, but it must have been an hour, for he had noticed nothing for a long time on this forsaken road. The night, although rather cold for midsummer, had held not a hint of rain. Indeed, had he dreamed it was going to rain, he would have stopped miles back for the night, as he had removed the top from his car a month ago. Queer, he had seen no signposts, yet in Montrose, where he had dinner about 7 o'clock, a garageman had told him to keep to the right and would come out on the good gravel road. He looked at the clock on the dashboard. 11, and no gravel road yet, not a gas station for miles. At the next one, he would have to stop and refill his tank. Foolishly, he had not thought of gas when he stopped for dinner. Must be getting pretty low. Well, the next town. Up one hill and down another, the powerful car sped. The road was getting narrower, and on the curves, the wheels had to be turned sharply. Blair watched the headlights searching through the curtain of rain into the deep woods on each side of the road, gliding the fir trees for a moment, then seeking out others to brighten. Big fellows, those trees, with trunks gigantic and tall. He forded a small stream, one of those streams that net Western Canadian Rockies, that net the Western Canadian Rockies. There was not a light ahead, nothing that would tell him a house or a town was near. It was raining harder now. A steady downpour that beat like a lash on his face. Beyond the headlights, the rain was a broad, golden, twinkling ribbon. His chamois driving gloves were sopping wet, and his clothes felt damp and clammy. God, he had never seen so much rain. Not a rift in the sky, not a sign that the storm would stop. What a fool he had been to take the top off his car. But he liked the summer wind in his face when he drove, the feel of it in his hair, the sting of it on his cheeks. There was a blanket in the back. He stopped short, scrambled out of the car, and, cursing softly to himself as he opened the back compartment, drew out a heavy robe. The water dripped down his back as he stooped over. In the cot again, he put the robe over his shoulders. The road led down now, gently. The car wheels made a slushing sound as they plodded through the mud. For perhaps half an hour, Blair drove through the storm, hoping at every turn he would see a friendly light ahead, something, a house, a barn, where he could stop for the night and get out of this ghastly rain. The road was getting muddier as he went, and now and then he had to put his car in second to plow through it. The sharp turn to the right, but the car, instead of responding to the wheel, skidded in the slimy mud, and before he knew it, was off the road in a ditch, muttering savagely. Blair put on all his power, but the car would not budge. Again and again he tried to move it ahead. It would not go. Finally he got out. Hopeless, more than hopeless, impossible. The wheels were buried in the mud to the hubcaps. Nothing to do but sit still and wait for somebody to come and haul him out. It was then that Blair realized suddenly that no car had passed him for hours. He'd been alone on the road. He wondered grimly what he would have done had he seen another car approaching. Certainly there would not have been room to pass. His car barely cleared the narrow road. Surely in the morning, trucks would be going by, early rising farmers going to market, a sheer cliff at night, he could not tell how high, at the left of the forest of firs. The rain seemed to come down more fiercely as he sat impatiently, wondering what he should do. Snapping out his lights, he reached in his pocket for a cigarette and, lighting it with his lighter, shielded it from the storm under a corner of the wet blanket. Even then, it soon was out. He threw it away in disgust. What was that ahead in the trees? He peered out. A dim light. With a leap, he was out of the car, wading through the mud, whistling. A light meant a house where he could possibly get shelter, or perhaps a car to haul him out of the mud. He preferred the shelter, he decided as he hurried along. Not finding a path, he made his way through the trees, losing the light and stopping still until he had located again. He stumbled through a stream before he knew it, groped his way up the bank, felt his trousers wet and clinging to his legs. A low branch tore his cap off his head, but he did not stop to look for it. He had left the forest behind and was plodding through what seemed to be a field, the tall, wet grasses up to his hips, but the light was not far away. A rumble of thunder, like an avalanche tearing down a mountainside. A second later, a streak of jagged lightning across the sky. In a moment that illuminated the heavens, he saw a house before him. A big place, 3 stories high, with a broad porch across the front, a mansion with queer pointed turrets at each corner. Then the sky was darker than ever. The house seemed swallowed by blackness, and only a little glow ahead told him where he had seen it. Someone was up. Otherwise, a light would not be burning, surely, in this house. He could stay for the night. In the morning, there would be a car to haul him out of the mud. Persons who kept up such a house would have to have some kind of car or truck. Blair stumbled onto the porch and scraped the mud off his shoes on the steps, then, hesitating a moment, looked at the 2 doors on the porch, one which seemed to be the main entrance, and the other which led into the lighted room. He chose the latter. No one answered his first knock, nor his second. Was it possible that no one was in? He could not see through the heavy drapes that covered the windows, but he thought he heard someone talking. Perhaps on account of the storm, his knock had not been heard. This time he pounded with his fists and then stepped back rather embarrassed at his boldness. The door opened a crack, and a woman's face peered out. Blair thought he had never seen such a face, thin and gaunt, and high, broad cheekbones, yellow, wrinkled skin, brown eyes deep set, and gray hair drawn so tightly back that the part in the middle was tinged with red near the low forehead. The woman was holding a candle above her head. He saw no more than her face, for her body was concealed behind the door. She was staring at him, her lips tightly closed in hard, straight line, lips that seemed a little blue to Blair. I've had an accident. My car is mired off the road in the mud. Have you a truck here to haul me out, or could I stay until the storm is over? I'm soaking wet, and my car has no top, he explained quickly. The woman's brown eyes never left his face, eyes seeming to see him, yet not evincing the slightest surprise or understanding. When he looked at them closer, he saw that no eyelashes shaded them, and yet, above them, shaggy black eyebrows, long and unkept, met at the ridge of the strange woman's large hooked nose. Still, the door did not open any wider. Still, the woman stared at him, her mouth closed. She was as tall as Blair, and her head blocked his vision into the lighted room. Please, I'm wet and cold. My car is stuck in the mud. May I come in for a while and get warm?" Blair was a little exasperated, and his tone showed it. Perhaps, though the woman could not understand English, she did look foreign. "Can't you understand me?" The woman nodded her head slowly in the affirmative. "Well, then let me in." Blair put up his hand on the door to force it open. Again the woman shook her head, this time in the negative. "But I tell you, I'm cold, and I must have help," Blair began, then stopped suddenly. An imperious voice from within had spoken. A woman's voice. "Nita, close the door." Someone else was in the room. Perhaps this other person would be more sympathetic. Angry by this time, Blair pushed the woman aside and entered the room. He stood blinking a moment until his eyes became accustomed to the light. Then he looked around, bewildered. The room was large, very large. One of those old-fashioned drawing rooms which ramble nearly at length of the house. He was standing on a soft aubusson rug. The roses faded with age. Around him were fragile French chairs, the gilt peeling from their slender legs. Near a table burdened with red checkered china, shepherdesses and bouquets of beaded flowers, was a reclaimer sofa upholstered in frayed yellow satin. The walls of the room, except for the portion at the back which held the bookcases, filled with books, were hung with large tapestries. There were no electric lights, nor any fixtures for them. Several oil lamps turned low, and innumerable candles gave all the light the big room had. Past the square rosewood piano, which stood in the center of the room, Blair saw, at the far end, a fire burning brightly in the grate of brown marble fireplace. More candles and more shepherdesses guarded its mantelpiece. In a big chair by the fire, the only comfortable chair in the room, a woman was sitting facing the glowing logs. "I'm sorry to intrude, madam," he said quickly, going over to her side, "but my car—" "I heard what you said to Nita," the woman interrupted, "but I can do nothing for you." If Nita's face was disagreeable, Blair thought this one's was so. Burnished red hair, sprinkled sparsely with gray, bristled above her heavy masculine features. Hair even too heavy for her big head. Her small green eyes were gazing at him angrily, and her lips, coarse and thick, were parted over large white teeth. Her skin yellowed, hung in several folds under her chin. Even the dull black dress, rather low in the neck, did not conceal the size of her limbs and the husky proportions of her form. A large woman, Blair thought, even larger than the other. He was not small himself, being some 5 feet 11 and a half in height, but this woman, who must obviously be the mistress of the house, seemed taller than he was. "I'm a peaceable man, madam," he started again. "Please believe me." He stopped short, for in the folds of the woman's neck he thought he saw something moving. He strained his eyes to see, then turned away quickly to hide his disgust. Held by a tiny gold chain, so fine it seemed to be made of thread, was a small chameleon, exactly the color of her yellow skin. Green eyes like emeralds studded the head, and a red tongue like a fang protruded from the open, moving mouth. It was alive, and no larger than his little finger. "You will leave immediately," the woman demanded, her voice rising until it was nearly a shriek. Blair caught a note of fear in it. "Well, if you can tell me where I am, and I am to get to the next, and how to get to the next town, I tell you, I'm lost. You have plenty of room to keep me for the night, if you will." "I have not." Blair looked back at the woman called Nita. She was standing where he had left her at the door. her lips still closed, her brown eyes on him. She too was dressed in black, although her dress was cheap and ill-fitting, with full old-fashioned balloon sleeves. "Haven't you a barn? Any place where I could stay?" Blair pleaded. He could hear the rain beating down on the windows, the frantic tap, tap, tap on the tin pipe somewhere near. The room was warm, almost too warm. He wondered how the woman could sit so close to the fire. "You will leave, sir." "Have you a telephone?" "No, I have not." The chameleon was crawling down the woman's neck, and now it's half on her black dress bosom. Its color was changing slowly to a dirty gray, but its eyes were still like bright emeralds, and its red tongue was beating around wildly. A door at the side swung open, as if a heavy weight had pushed it, and a dog stood snarling at him. The woman at the fireplace had turned away and picked up a book which was on her lap. Blair stood undecided, looking from the dog to the woman who must be the servant. He thought, although he was not sure, that the look of fear came into her eyes. The dog, more like a wolf than a dog, came toward him slowly, its ears lifted into two sharp points, its lips bared, its eyes red coals, glowing, burning red coals. Blair shifted uneasily. The dog was a big beast, larger than a wolf, and yet not large as a Great Dane. Its dark brown body was slender, and its head was big in proportion to its body. The woman by the fire appeared to have forgotten him. She was bending over her book. The dog was beside him now. He could feel the hot breath from its nostrils on his bare hands, snarling like a wild animal. It jumped at him. Blair leaped aside and ran through the door, which the servant was still holding half open, the dog at his heels. Down the porch and through the high grass field he ran, stumbling now and then over the obstruction in the way. At the edge of the field, the dog stopped and stood watching him while he ran on until he had crossed the creek and was safe in his car. Reaching down in his pocket at the side, Blair found his revolver and grasped it nervously, panting from his unwanted exertion. Who were those fiends in that house? Fiends who would let a dog attack a man in their own house. That woman with the live chameleon chained to her neck, hugging the fire so closely. Nita, who held open the door for him. If she hadn't, well, he wouldn't be here now. Whatever had possessed him to drive at night in a territory he didn't know. He must have missed the road miles back. Blair was sorry for a moment. He had started on this western trip. 2 months ago, he was contented and reasonably happy in New York, without a thought of driving to the Pacific coast. Then a letter from Mark Toller, and an invitation to visit his new lodge in British Columbia. The flip of a coin, and he had started driving, instead of the more sensible method of going by train. True, he had a fine time with Toller, but by the time the motor fever was well in his blood, and he decided after a few weeks, visit with his friends to go to Vancouver, and from there down the coast. How Toller had found this place of his in the mountains, miles from civilization, he didn't know. But Mark declared he was never going back to New York again, that he could write so much better away by himself. Damn, he couldn't sit here and get pneumonia. Blair threw the robe over his shoulders, dug another cap from his bag, and debated what he should do. If he stayed and fell asleep in the car with his clothing soaked, his shoes wet in the morning, he might have a bad cold. And he didn't relish colds. If he walked down the road at the decent clip, he would at least keep warm, and he might find a town beyond. No more bursting into lighted houses, he decided grimly. Slipping his revolver into his pocket, he locked his car, turned out the lights, and started ahead. The rain had not let up. The sky was forbidding and dark as ever. Another attempt to light a cigarette was a failure. Blair thought he had never wanted one so badly. Glancing back now and then, he saw that the light still glowing dimly through the trees, and his hand instinctively clutched the gun in his pocket. Why had he left his gun in the car when he had gone to the house? If he had the gun with him, he would surely have used it. Ruefully, he felt the shoulder of his overcoat where the dog's teeth had ripped the heavy cloth. Without the protection of this coat, those white fangs would have torn his shoulder into ribbons. He was warmer now, for he was walking briskly. His fatigue seemed to have left him entirely. The road was bad, and often he sank ankle deep into mud. The miles went slowly. So slowly, he thought he had been walking for hours, not a light any place, but the rain was falling more gently, almost singing as it drizzled to the puddles in the road. A few stars showed at the far end of the horizon, feebly, as if they were afraid of the seething dark clouds near them. He had walked perhaps 5 miles when he came to a wooden gate across the road, which he climbed slowly. In the glow of his cigarette lighter, he read a small sign nailed to the post, "Private Road." So he had been on a private road, perhaps, an estate to which the big house belonged, and that the woman hugging the fire, the woman with the scaly chameleon on her fat yellow neck, was probably its mistress. Queer that she had not farmed this land, which must be fertile and must be very valuable. The giant virgin forest still stood over it, except for the field in the front of the house. And how the devil had he gotten to the private road in the beginning? If there was a gate at this end, there must have been one at the other. A few paces from the gate, he came to the brow of a hill. Looking down, he saw a few lights in the distance, a town, which he judged was not more than a mile away. Blair took heart again, as he walked on faster now. The first streaks of dawn were reddening the sky, a dawn shadowed by heavy, dull clouds. Chapter 2. Blair awakened from a sound about 2 o'clock in the only hotel he had been able to find. He remembered staggering in and following an old man up some narrow stairs. He got out of his wet clothing. He didn't know how he got out of his wet clothing, he didn't know, but he saw when he opened his eyes that his suit and overcoat were draped over a chair. Quickly slipping on his overcoat, quite dry by now, he started searching down the hall for a bath. Somewhat refreshed from it, a little later, ruefully put on his mud-stained clothes. A pretty sight he was, he thought as he smoothed his hair in front of the cracked mirror with a pocket comb. A pretty sight, more like a tramp than a gentleman, who, because his father had left him a nice sum of money, had never had to work for his living. Tall and slender, his brown hair brushed straight back from his high forehead, and his hazel eyes seemed to smile even in his soberest moments. Blair looked disgruntled, regardless of his disreputable suit. A dark beard of 2 days' growth didn't even detract from his appearance. Slinging his overcoat over his arm, he paid his bill at the hotel and found breakfast in a restaurant nearby. Bowsvane, he judged, was the name of the town he had stumbled onto. He had been too tired to ask last night, but Bowsvane it must be, because the name occurred constantly on shops of the small main street. A lazy, slow name that seemed to fit the 200 or 300 inhabitants. From the restaurant keeper, he found that he could get a truck to haul his car out of the mud from one of the garages at the end of the street. 3 o'clock when he reached the place and found the proprietor tinkering with an old Ford. Yes, McClure, for this was his name, could take his truck right away. Where was Mr. Rodman's car? Up beyond the private road, McClure repeated, after Blair. How did you get through from the other side? There's a gate there too. I don't know. I didn't see a gate. All I know is that I got in there some way. I'm a stranger here in British Columbia, and I was trying to find my way to Vancouver. How far beyond the gate? By the big house. McClure looked at him sharply, and then went back to his work. Blair hesitated and a moment later decided to tell McClure his experience. What's the matter with those people in that house? I was wet and chilled through and from the rain, and when I saw their light to ask them help me, all the help I got was to have a big brute dog tear my coat and run me off the place. McClure nodded slowly. You shouldn't have gone in. There are devils in that house, and that dog is the devil's own hound. Believe me, when I go there, if I keep the dog away or I won't I go there, they keep the dog away or I won't go. Once, the first time I went, I had a run-in with the brute, and I left in a hurry. No, no, sir, not for a million would I go up there when that hound is about. Wonder he didn't kill you. Who is that oldish woman with the red hair? A big, tall woman, taller than I am. Must be Miss Bosvane. I never have seen her, but they say around here that she has red hair. Must be gray by this time. She's over 55. You mean to say you've never seen her? No, but I take all her supplies up to her once a month, and I see the maid, Nita, when I go up. A lot of good that does, though, because she's dumb. Can't say a word. Never even opens her mouth. She understands well enough, but can't talk. Only the two of them, that in that big place. Only the two of them in that big place. Yep. Blair waited patiently for the other to go on, for McClure was busy under the ford now. Finally, he crawled out. Yep, it's a queer house to behold. We don't understand 'em down here. Morel Bosvane is the red-headed woman's name. Glad you saw her, because the folks here got to thinking there was some reason she didn't want to be seen. Look all right? Yes. A homely woman, though. She was born in that house. There are folks around here who remember her as a girl. Her father had that house then, old Simeon Bowsvane, a hard number, harder than nails, mean as they make 'em. He owned a whole place around here. The town is named after him, although I don't know why. Never amounted to much because he fought roads and railroads and everything, wanted to be alone. Cracked, they said he was. But he died before I came here. Anyway, Morel, the girl, went abroad when she was about 17, I heard, and which of course was years ago. Old Simeon died in that house 15 years ago. Nita was with him, and she walked all the way down here to get somebody up there. Nita could talk then. Since Morel came about 10 years ago, she hasn't said a word. Morel came in a car, and nobody in town saw her. We knew she was coming through. Jimson, the grocer, had a letter from her before she came, telling him what supplies to send up. Every month, I take up for him because he has no delivery car, and I get the order for the next month. Miss Bosvane pays me well, always in cash. She doesn't keep a car, not even a horse, and she hasn't even a telephone. Doesn't pretend to farm. They get firewood too, huh? No, I don't know how they keep warm. I saw a big log burning in their grate. I suppose Nita cuts back in the forest. She's the goat all the way around. However, I've never been in the old house. I honk my horn when I get to the front porch and look around to see the dog's not there, and start to unload. Nita always comes out and pays me, then gives me the next order and any mail that is going out. That's all I know about the old place. Nice inside? Old. Place gives me the creeps every time I go up, but I don't mind taking the money. She must own a pile of property. Yeah, an awful pile. Anybody from here go up to see her? Nobody. Some of the women around here who knew her as a girl thought they might go up, and Miss Jinson the wife of the grocer, wrote her a note when she first came, asking her when she could call. The note came back unopened. So that's that. Ms. Bosvain evidently doesn't want anybody up there. Wonder you got in. I forced my way in, that's how. Has the dog been there for a long time? Ever since Ms. Bosvain came the last time. I was the first to see the brute when I took up the first load to Jimson. As I was getting out my truck, it sprang at me, and I got in again in a hurry. You bet. And started back to town. I sat down then and wrote a note to Ms. Bosvain and went back and pinned it to the gate in the road. Sort of a chance, but I wouldn't go up there again to deliver it. Well, I went back to the gate the next day to see it was gone, and lo and behold, there was an answer to my note telling me the dog wouldn't bother me again and that I should bring back the groceries. Well, whoever walked those 5 miles to the gate, I don't know, perhaps Nita, but I know that was the only way I could get a word to Miss Bosvain, as I was the one who had to take up the mail and the groceries, and when I didn't, she wouldn't get any mail. I went up that day, and although I've seen the dog since, at a distance, he hasn't done anything but snarl at me. I don't linger there, let me tell you. I know a mean dog when I see one. Killed a horse once, that dog did. A horse of that old man Snyder's, but he was scared to go up to collect for it, so he wrote a letter, and I took it back the cash for him. $300. Nobody around here ever had nobody around here but I ever goes through that gate. Wonder why the dog stopped when he was running after you. Someone must have called him. Hear anything? No, but I was too excited to hear anything, man. I ran. Usually I get along pretty well with dogs. Have two myself in New York. Nobody could get along with this one, you say. You say you're going back to Vancouver? Yes, and from there down the coast to Mexico. Ready? Anytime. McClure drove the truck out of his garage, threw some rope into it, and waited for Blair to get in. Just as he was turning out of the narrow drive, the bus from Winton stopped, and a girl got out of the front seat, while the driver hoisted two suitcases out of the back compartment. She stood puzzled for a moment, and then went up to the truck where the two men were sitting. Where can I find Mr. McClure? She asked softly. That's me. Miss Bosvain, do you know her? Wrote me that Mr. McClure would take me up to her place a few miles beyond Bosvain. I am Janet Lord, and I'm to be her companion. She smiled engagingly. McClure looked her up and down before he answered. Blair saw a slight frown touch. Blair saw a slight frown touch his open, frank face. Why, yes, I suppose I can. In fact, I'm on my way there now with Mr. Rodman. You can hop in. I'll tell the bus driver to bring your bags. Blair slipped out of the small seat, intending to sit behind, when the girl motioned him back. I'll sit in the back. That's fine. It'll be fun. But not very comfortable. Oh, that's all right. I can't sit back with you. I'm afraid you might fall, and there isn't room for three in the front. Surely with that, she climbed into the back, on top of her suitcases, which the bus driver had just brought. As soon as she was settled, she pulled off her snug-fitting felt hat and ran her fingers slightly through her yellow short hair, as if it was a tremendous relief to get the tight hat off. Oh, I've worn that hat all day, she apologized, and her eyes met Blair's. Big, violet eyes with a hint of fatigue in them. Her face was pale, Blair thought too pale, and her skin shone luminously. Thin, almost too thin, she seemed, and her hands, when she drew off her gloves, were slender and as fragile as delicate china. She closed her eyes and drank in the fresh, clean air. Lashes of dark brown swept her cheeks, touching the faintly dark rings under her eyes. There was a childish, elfish look about the girl. As she sat there, her hands limp on her knees, her head thrown back, a small nose, a small crimson mouth slightly turned up at the corners, cheeks that held no color at all. These and her boyish figure made Blair think of her as a child. Everything about her, except her eyes, suggested extreme youth. Her eyes seemed older than her body, infinitely older. A simple dark suit, blue with a bit of white at the neck, was almost too warm for the summer day. Janet Lord fanned her face with her handkerchief and unbuttoned her short jacket. "Hot, isn't it?" she said simply, in a tired, small voice. "Rather. I haven't told you my name. It's Blair Rodman, and my car is stuck in the mud up by Miss Bosevane's. I had to walk 6 miles last night in a storm and mud, so that's why I look like this, like a tramp." The truck jerked along, and once the girl put her hand on Blair's arm to steady herself, she took it away immediately, however, and Blair saw a flush of color on her pale cheeks. Poor kid, going up to that house and that woman. Blair wondered why she was going, and if she knew anything about Miss Bosvane. She might be a distant relative or slight acquaintance. At any rate, he pitied her, but his pity changed in an instant to interest when a slight wind blew her blonde hair over her eyes, and she pushed the bright strands back gracefully with her fingers. Lovely hair, and with the sun on it, it glittered like spun gold. "Do you know Miss Boisvane?" he asked abruptly. "No, do you?" "No," the man answered shortly. After all, he didn't know Miss Boisvane, had never even known her name until he came upon McClure. "No, I don't," he repeated. "I'm a stranger here, but how do you happen to be going to such a lonely place? For you must know it's lonely in these hills." "Oh, I'm going to love it." Her eyes sparkled and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You see, I've never been in a place like this before, never, not even in the country, and I'm tired of the city and the hammering of the typewriter all day long. I've stood it now for 4 years, a day and a day out from 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 at night, working every minute in a big office where I'm just one of the 50 girls who do the same thing. Then I work at night too. I'm sick and tired of the grind, and always I've planned to go away and do something else. I didn't know what it would be, but I knew I would go. My obligations are all paid now, every cent of them, so I'm free to do as I please, as long as I earn some kind of living for myself. For besides working all day at the office, I've been working 4 or 5 nights a week too to make extra money, but I don't need to have more. I'm free. I thought this position with Miss Bosvane would rest me for 6 months or so until I get a new grip on life. So then I saw her ad in the paper. I answered it, and I got the job." "Her ad? Did she put an ad in the paper?" "Yes, in the press in Vancouver. I had such a nice letter from her, and I don't think I'll mind her peculiarities at all. I'm used to older people, you see. I took care of my father for years before he died, and if anyone was peculiar, he was." "When did your father die?" "4 years ago. After he died, I had to earn my own living. I thought I would have plenty, you see, because we had lived pretty well, but after he was gone, I found there was nothing but a few debts, mostly doctor bills, which I had to pay. It was lucky that at night at home I studied typewriting and shorthand. I did it for fun, to pass the time, but it came in handy." "Is that why you worked so hard, to pay your father's debts?" "Yes." Blair looked curiously at the pretty girl at his side, the girl who seemed to him just a child. "How old are you? You don't look as if you had worked 4 years." "I'm 22 now." At most, Blair would have guessed 17, except for her eyes. "I wanted something easy," Janet Lord continued, "something I wouldn't have to exert myself too much to do, because I am pretty well tired out now. I used to read to my father a lot. hours a day, and that's what Miss Bosvain wants me to do at her house. She said in her letter that her eyesight was failing. I have her ad and her letter here if you care to see them. She opened the shabby black purse and hunted among the contents for a minute or so. Finally, she drew out an envelope and pulled out from its scrap of paper. Blair saw at once that it was a clipping from a newspaper. He took it to read. Elderly lady wishes young, intelligent companion, preferably one with blue eyes and one who will consent to live in the country. Applicants should enclose a photograph. Address 1026 Press. You answered this? My dear Miss Lord, the letter began. The handwriting firm and strong, the letters were formed. From your letter, I think you will suit me admirably. As a companion, your duties will be slight. In fact, nothing more than reading to me several hours a day and tending to my correspondence. My eyesight is not as good as it has been, and I find it a strain to read to myself. I especially wanted a girl who had so strong home ties and preferably no family. No strong home ties and no family. As the place out here is lonely, and I wish my companion to be permanent. You say you are used to individuals, that your father was one for many years, invalids. I know from this that you will have more sympathy for an elderly lady like myself than a girl who has had the usual modern carefree life. Realizing that you are bound to be lonely up here, I shall give you a week off every 2 months, and in that time you may visit your friends. I have many peculiarities which may bother you at first, but I'm sure you will enjoy the place after you get used to me, and I get used to you. The salary will start at $75 a month, and your living. Enclosed, you will find $50, which will take care of your transportation from Vancouver. A train will take you from Vancouver to Winston, and a bus from there to Boisvane, where you can get Mr. McClure at Mr. McClure's garage to take you to my home, which is 6 miles from Boisvane. As I keep no car and do not have a telephone, I cannot meet you at Boisvane, and you cannot notify me when you get there. However, I shall be waiting for you anxiously. My household is small. I have but one servant, and do no entertaining, so the problem of clothes should not bother you. Sincerely, Morel Bosvane. Blair went through the letter again, this time more slowly. It seemed so sincere and open, he could not imagine that the woman he had been sitting by the fire in that house in the hills, with the chameleon around her neck, the woman who had permitted her dog to attack him, could write such a letter. Why did she want this girl up there in that house? A girl with blue eyes, she said in her ad. What difference would the color of her eyes make? A nice letter, don't you think? Yes, Blair said shortly as he gave it back, but you don't know anything about this woman. You may not like her. I think I will. Anything to get away from the typewriter, anything to be quiet again and read and walk around among some trees. I haven't had a minute's rest since my father died, and I've worked so hard that this will seem like play. The people in Bosvane seem to think Miss Bosvane is a peculiar woman, Blair warned cautiously. I'm prepared for it. Father used to be different. Too, cross at times and then marvelous at others. And I don't care about company. Father and I never had any when he was here. And since he's gone, I've worked so hard I haven't had time for any. Haven't you any friends or close relatives? The girl shook her head. Only the girls at the office, and I never had much time to chum around with them. No relatives at all. Father was all I had. My mother died when I was a baby. A turn, and Blair's car was in view in the ditch. McClure stopped, and he sprang out from the truck. I'll wait down here and tie the ropes on it while you take Miss Lord to the house. Where is the house? The girl asked curiously, looking around. In among those trees, McClure pointed to the side of the road. You can't see it from here. With with this, he started honking his horn while Blair shook hands with Janet and went to his car. He saw the truck disappear on a narrow road. McClure, still tooting the horn, Janet was looking straight ahead, peering around the side of the windshield. The wind was blowing her hair, and her cheek, what he could see of it, seemed very white, much whiter than it had been. Presently, when Blair had ropes tied to the car, McClure came back looking rather glum, Blair thought. Neither of the men said a word while they were getting ready to haul the car from the ditch. Finally, when everything was ready, McClure leaped in his truck and put on the power. The big roadster did not respond immediately. It was mired deeply, but the mud was beginning to dry. A mighty lurch, and it was out. Blair stopped in the road and went up to McClure. Can you let me have some gas too? I'm low, and thanks a million times. He slipped a $10 bill into McClure's hand. While the mechanic was draining some gas from his tank, he looked narrowly at Blair. Damn funny thing that, he announced. What? I don't understand it at all. What? Well, that girl going up there, pretty, wasn't she? She seems to think it'll be a lark. Damn funny thing, though. I took a pretty girl up there about 2 months ago. Pretty girl, too. Why Miss Bosvane needs two companions, I don't know. Maybe the other girl left. No, she didn't. She must be up there, yet I haven't taken her back, and I'm the only one that goes up to Bosvane. Damned funny thing. Blair stood quite still in the road, and was frowning when he finally spoke to McClure. I'm going to hang around a while. I had intended on going on, but now I think I'll stay for a few days. Miss Lord is too fine a girl to be left at the mercy of Miss Bosvane. Chapter 3. Janet was alone on the big broad porch, alone with her suitcases. She suddenly felt very small as she stood there, hesitating before she pulled the big knocker on the door. The house was so large. She had thought it was a medium-sized, comfortable farmhouse with a wide sweep of a lawn in front, a lawn bordered by rows of bright, old-fashioned flowers, tall hollyhocks, prim pansies nestling close to the ground, a house perhaps on the floor with a rambling wing and cherry windows curtained with crisp muslin. She didn't know why she expected this, except from the tone of Miss Bosvane's letter and the fact that she was alone with one servant. Why, this house was a mansion. It must have 20 or 30 rooms. Not how one servant could take care of it, she didn't know. 3 stories high, too, with turrets like paper caps on each corner. She heard the truck moving away down the road. She had offered to pay the man, but he said Miss Bosvane would pay the bill later. With that, he had quickly deposited her bags on the porch, touched his cap, and was gone. Disappointed, she looked again at the brown field beyond the porch. No green grass, only hay. No flowers except at the far edge some vagrant sunflowers, their faces as big as dinner plates, nodding to her, grinning at her discomfiture. Woods beyond these, pine and fir, and the music of the hidden creek. The house was square and homely, a cold gray stone house, the stones faintly tinged with green moss. At the left, reaching nearly to the top of the house, ivy clung tightly to the walls, reaching inquisitive fingers around the corner to the front. The blinds were drawn all over the lower floor, and the upper windows, the shutters, weather-beaten and gray, were tightly closed. A thin spiral of white smoke arose from one of the chimneys and, drawn by the breeze, floated away and melted into the darkening sky, where a lonely star was shining with a steady yellow light. Janet fingered the knocker, and it was bronze and formed like a lion's head. She let it fall and trembled for a moment at the sound it made. No one answered. So she took hold of it again and was startled when another door farther down the porch opened. A woman stepped out, a woman clad in black, tall and ungainly with grey hair. "Miss Bosvane?" Janet asked timidly. She was frightened. The woman's face was hard and her eyes deep set. They were looking straight at the girl. The woman nodded and motioned her to enter the door, which was open. Then she stopped and picking up the two heavy suitcases easily, followed Janet into the room. Janet stood slightly bewildered on the threshold. The room was so large and so ornately furnished. "Miss Lord?" "Oh, Miss Lord," a deep voice asked, and Janet instinctively went forward. The voice came from the fireplace where the woman was sitting in a big chair. "Yes, I am Miss Lord. Come here. I want to look at you." Her tone was sharp, and Janet's, tears springing to her eyes, walked quickly toward the fireplace. "I am Miss Bosvane," the big woman explained, keeping her chair. She looked Janet over, head to foot, green eyes, cold and small, a mop of red hair slightly tinged with gray, a thick, pendulous nose, full lips, and strong, firm jaw. Janet noted she had returned the woman's appraising stare. After a moment, Miss Bosvane nodded her head and motioned Janet to be seated. "I think you'll do," she said wearily, and smiled a little. There was no warmth to her smile, no welcome. Several candles were lighted in the sconce on the wall nearby, and shed a pale flickering light on the woman's red hair. "That is Nita," she announced abruptly, inclining her head toward the maid. "She cannot talk. However, she can understand everything you say. She has been with me a very long time." Janet nodded, not quite sure of herself. She settled back with more comfortability in a straight-back chair and looked at the fire. Flames were dancing, yellow and long, from two fat logs. "How do you think you're going to like it here?" Why, why, well, pretty well, I think. I'm tired out from office work, and this will be a change." Janet glanced again at Miss Bosvane. She thought she saw something move on the woman's neck, but could not be sure. Something yellow, like the woman's skin, something small. She swallowed hard as she turned away. A chameleon. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her purse for her handkerchief. Of course, Miss Bosvane had said she was peculiar and set in her ways, but how she could wear this creature, this reptile, around her neck. Perhaps, though, after a while, she would get used to this strange employer of hers, an employer who had seemed very generous and sincere in her letter. It might take some time, but there would be hours when she would be alone with her, hours when she would have to see this scaly thing nestling in Miss Bosvane's neck. "I told you I am rather queer," Miss Bosvane spoke again, as if reading the girl's thoughts. "So you must be prepared for my little oddities, which the ordinary person has not. This chameleon I have had for years. I am greatly attached to it." She touched it half tenderly with her fingers. "I would not give it up for anything. After you learn my ways, I think you will be comfortable. I shall need you only 2 or 3 hours a day, from 10 in the morning until noon or so. The rest of the day is yours to do as you please. You can walk, read, sew, anything. I shall not ask you to account for your hours for your spare time. You will not have to help around the house. Nita does all of that." Janet wondered how this speechless maid could do everything there was to be done about such a large old house. Cook the meals, keep the place clean, wait on her mistress. When she looked toward her, Nita had disappeared, and the 2 bags were gone. Perhaps I'd better go to my room and bathe. I am..." "We will have tea first, Miss Lord. Then you may go up. I have no breakfast, however. Don't let that influence you, because you may have yours whenever you choose. My dinner hour is at 1 o'clock. Tea is at twilight. The quiet of the big room was beginning to soothe Janet's nerves. There was not sound from anywhere, except the tick, tick, tick of the banjo clock hanging on the wall back of Miss Bosvain's chair. Half of the west wall was covered with books, which Janet eyed with pleasure. Nothing such she enjoyed more than reading. She would ask Miss Bosvain if she might take a book upstairs tonight with her, if she could read herself to sleep. From the bookcases, she glanced around the room again and started up to where she saw Nita lighting the candle silently, holding a torch in her hand. She had not heard the maid enter. Indeed, she could not hear her now. She went from one sconce to another. The big woman finished with the candles, which glowed invitingly all over the room now, sending small gleams like sheeted ghosts up on the high walls. As silently as she came, Nita pushed open a swinging door and went out. She came back almost immediately, bearing a large tray with tea things on it. Cozy, cozy, Janet thought, sipping tea by the fire and helping herself to small cakes from the table bedside beside her. Cozy. Only she wished for a more comfortable chair in which she could loll and rest her back. The tea was excellent, light-colored, almost like water, yet with a pungent, fragrant flavor. The cakes, too, were good. On the table was fine lace cloth, so fine it seemed woven of cobwebs. The napkin Janet had in her lap was of sheer linen, shiny as satin, and edged with the same lace as the cloth was fashioned. On her saucer lay a teaspoon of sterling silver of an old ornate pattern. The teapot and sugar and creamer were also of heavy silver, and the light of the fire turned the silver to gold where the beams caught it. Perhaps it would not be so bad living here with these lovely things. She would have to get used to Miss Bosvain and the strange maid whose face never changed expression, whose lips always held the same straight line. Janet thought of the times when she and her father had tea. In those years, which now seemed ages ago, tea in her father's sick room. She held out her cup. She held out her cup for more and watched Miss Bosvain's heavy, blunt fingers as she poured it. On the hand was one ring, a ring such as Janet had never seen before. It seemed of glass at first, but the stone was too luminous, too bright for glass. A perfectly round stone, larger than a marble, of water, clear purity. You were looking at the stone in my ring, Miss Bosvain said, and slipped the jewel from her finger. Janet took it silently and examined it. Now the glass was not so clear. There was something in it, in the center. She peered again and recognized her own features. "It's a mirror?" she asked, interested. "No, it is a crystal, and you will look again. You will see other things that pertain to your own life and future. Look very carefully." As Janet gazed, her own face faded slowly, and another countenance took shape. She could not tell to whom it belonged at first because it was vague and very shadowy. The features slowly took shape, and a man's face was smiling at her. Blair Rodman's. With a quick movement, she handed back the ring. Miss Bosvain had laughed rather unsteadily. "How queer," she said aloud, although she meant to keep her thoughts to herself. "What is queer?" The girl did not answer. Instead, she looked toward the swinging door, where she thought she heard scratching and grating sound. The door opened, and a big dog bounded into the room and came straight for her. The dog's eyes, bloodshot and wild, stared at her. Janet recoiled. She didn't know just why, but the dog was so fierce and his movements as the lithe supple as those of the tiger. When he reached her chair, he snarled a little and lay down at her feet, growling still to himself, as if she did not exactly please him. Her eyes never left his face. "You need not fear, Rajah," Miss Bosvane explained. "He will not hurt you, although to most people he is very dangerous. He keeps strangers out of the house. Are you sure he will not bite me? He looks at me as if he doesn't, well, as if he doesn't like me very well." Janet shuddered as the dog snarled again. She had no desire to make friends with him. "No, he knows you are one of the household." There was another uncomfortable silence, a silence broken only by the repeated snarling of Rajah. The girl longed to go to her room, but she supposed she would have to wait for permission from Miss Bosvane. Suddenly, her employer leaned toward her. "What face did you see in the crystal?" she asked eagerly, her small eyes narrowing until they were hardly visible under the heavy lids. Oh, nothing," Janet answered hesitantly. "I would like to know," Miss Bosvane insisted. She laid a cold hand on the girl's wrist. She must answer the woman some way. She demanded an answer. "My father's," Janet murmured. She did not know why she would have told a falsehood. Some strange whim led her to not tell the truth. Miss Bosvane, taking her hand away, settled back, a wide smile on her face. "Do you want to look at it again?" "I'd rather not. It upsets me. Father, you know." "Yes, I see." A shrill whistle from outside the room startled the girl, and in dismay she watched Rajah spring to his feet, put his great head against the swinging door, and run out. She looked inquisitively at Miss Bosvane, who was gazing at her crystal ring intently. "Was that someone?" Janet asked, rather puzzled. The woman had said there was only two people there with her in this big house. The whistle, the loud and piercing, seemed human to Janet. "It was nothing," Miss Bosvane said absently. "Nothing. Probably a bird. Rajah is very sensitive to noises." To Janet, the whistle seemed more like a call to the dog than a cry of a bird. At any rate, Rajah had gone, and she was much more comfortable. She heaved a little sigh of relief. "You will get used to Rajah," Miss Bosvane announced, reading Janet's thoughts again. She picked up a small silver bell from the table at her side and shook it vigorously. Nita appeared at the swinging door and came forward. "I think Miss Lord wants to go to her room, Nita. Did you take her bags up?" Nita nodded affirmatively. "Just follow Nita upstairs. Good night." "Good night." As Janet arose from her chair, she glanced again around the room. A piano, she had not touched one for years. It would be so good to have one again. She put her hand on the rosewood case lovingly and started toward the door. Fastened to the wall at the side of the door was an ornate gilt frame about 6 feet high and 4 feet in width. She thought it had once sheltered a mirror, but now this was gone. The amber satin wall covering was all Janet could see. A companion frame on the other side of the door also was empty of glass. Instinctively, the girl looked back at the fireplace. She had noticed a gilt frame above it, a round and beautifully carved. This, too, she saw, held no mirror, although it must have at one time. Certainly Miss Bosvane was peculiar. Why, if she had taken down the mirrors, did she not remove the useless frames? Nita, a small candle in her hand, opened the swinging door for Janet. The hallway was dark, and the candle which the maid had held over her head lighted up the bare space. The feet of the servant made no sound, whereas Janet's high-heeled slippers clicked distressingly. She tried to walk on tiptoes, but could not succeed in making her footsteps inaudible as Nita did. The maid must have felt had felt soled slippers on. She decided as she minced along, feeling that she was too noisy, too raucous for this quiet, still house. A flight of stairs, uncarpeted, loomed ahead. At the top of them, Nita paused and looked back at the girl. Her brown eyes shone strangely, and her lips seemed drawn in a tighter line than ever. Janet smiled wanly. After all, she would try to make friends with this creature who was dumb. Nita's expression did not alter at Janet's smile. They must have halted at the top of the stairs for a few minutes because Nita did not go forward until she heard Raja bounding up behind her. When he was at the landing, she had led the way to the door straight ahead and opened it slowly. Handing the lighted candle to Janet, she left her, the door partly open. The girl stood for a second, undecided on the threshold, the dog at her heels. Nita had disappeared in the darkness. She did not even hear her walking down the stairs. Boldly, she opened the door and entered the room. Turning to close it, she found Raja crouching in the way, his head between his paws and his red eyes watching her. He gnarled fiercely when she tried to force the door closed and bared his wolf-like fangs in despair. She called, "Nita!" Only the echo of her voice, bounding up the empty hall, answered her again. Again and again she called, but no answer. She dared not try to force this dog out. He was so fierce, she was afraid of him. When no one answered her call, she tried to coax him away, but this brought her no results. To her soft, luring voice, he answered only in growls, and his teeth gleamed in the dim light of the candle she was holding in her hand. Forced to leave the door open, she turned into the room and held the candle up so that she could see what her quarters were like. A low cry escaped her lips when she saw the room. It was empty, save for a small army cot in the corner. A cot covered only with harsh dark brown army blanket. No rugs, no chair, no dresser, nothing but the cot. Beside it were her 2 suitcases, open. That is where we leave for the evening, my dears. I hope you're enjoying it so far. Good evening, Angela Bowley. All right, my dears. Thank you for all of the likes, the comments, the shares. You can find me on mysterycontrol.com, where you can buy pillows and my images of my paintings on your shirts, all kinds of things. You can find me at universitymagicus.com. You can find me at thegentlemanpsychic.com. I am giving readings. Also, you can find me where else? Gentleman Psychic. Oh, I don't know. I'm too tired. Anyway, I love you all, and I shall see you next time. Unpleasant screams.